of aviation security and cyber and emergency matters or management. It all matters, but Matthew, good old title as always, never bores me when I say it. Now here we are, episode 4, and this time we're covering human factors in security and safety, the human firewall, and I've got something that I want to add to it, the 4Fs factor, which is my own little invention, but it's something that niggles me wherever I go, and I always see where the 4Fs, what scale it is at every single location or destination I ever visit or am responsible for. So we'll come to that shortly. But human factor in security and safety. I mean, I was going to say it's a killer, but literally it is. And and I think at this moment in time now, a lot of people are a little bit wary and a little bit focused and a little bit concerned as to where it's going.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. You're right. I don't think any modern safety or security type manager or anyone that might have some of that in their responsibilities within an organization, whatever it be, right? It doesn't have to be specific to sort of logistics and aviation. I don't know how you cannot be, or at least have processes or sense of measures in place that helps you as an organization identify, support, and successfully resolve issues around the classical human factors piece around the way we interact with each other and systems and technology and things like that. And then obviously with what we've gone through the last couple of years, the sort of profound psychological aspects where quite sensitively you could go through certain things that may or may not be traumatic to any degree at some point in the past, and those symptoms or those effects will just reveal itself at a completely new point in the timeline that you just weren't aware. And I always liken it, Chris, to the in a basic traffic accident, you get a bit of whiplash on the neck from the seatbelt, right? And you sort of walk away and like, yeah, it's fine. And literally 6 months later, you'll be, what's happened to my neck? And talking to the doctor, you're trying to get through it. And it turns out that, yeah, you had an injury that didn't appear till 6 months later from a really simple whiplash, right? And
trouble is that doesn't happen these days, mate, because by the time you've got home, you've got a couple of SMSs saying, no win, no fee. And if you've had whiplash, it's a minimum 3,000 up to 5,000.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, there's symptoms appearing that would never have appeared.
Yeah, you're right. The underwriters are onto it.
It's that's the sad way of the world now. It's crazy. But listen, you mentioned human factors, and especially on the safety side, SMS. I've been involved with so many companies who, if you were out at a conference or whatever, and you sat down and you're having a chat with the head or whatever, and you say, safety and security are the two most important pillars in our foundation, blah blah blah, and then you ask them, what do you do? And they're able to validate so much that's going on in their business, but they're not able to verify the effectiveness of those actions. They understand the responsibilities, but they don't fulfill or carry out the accountabilities. And I think over time, that way of managing from C-level and the C-level suite is eroding, because what they're doing is they're not delegating, they're abdicating the responsibility and accountability over to the QHS and E departments. And that's a big risk in itself, and then when you look at some of the auditing training that goes on, and then you get the same group of people and you give them the benefits of a really good SMS auditing, they come out with totally different perspectives of what they should be doing.
Yeah, the old adage being, look, boss, I trained 100 people, and to what effect? Well, we're not going to measure that. It's 100 people, right? So, and as you pointed out, within the sort of safety management system culture, and the sort of the carve out that I work within, it's a bit, it's a combination of that training and implementation empowerment, but it's also trying to achieve a culture where discussion and analysis, is not incriminating in any way, right? And you create what you call this just culture, right? And and in the security realm, we've been sort of banging on about this for years, right? And how do you report vulnerabilities or concerns, whether they be security or safety, but do that in a way that's not punitive to you as an individual, or to the organization, right? And of course, in the security realm, the old sort of, in a lot of ways, it could almost come across as a sort of criminal allegation if you don't get it right, which then has civil liabilities attached to it in terms of yourself as an individual. So,
especially as a senior manager.
Especially as a senior manager, and of course, as you know, as part of just take airlines, right? As part of the sort of AOC registration of an aircraft operator, you've got a collection of post holders that are all on the regulatory and legal hook for certain outcomes. If you don't get that right, there are good parts of the world, well, parts of the world that we know rather well that shoot first, ask questions later, kind of thing.
100%. And on top of that, it's also the types of communication and reports and regular meetings, etc. That becomes a recoverable document. And if things are mentioned there and people haven't taken the appropriate action, that's if the little marks on that investigation show NP, normal practice, then you're in trouble. And I don't think enough people are aware of the ramifications, of the difference between responsibility and accountability. And to keep an eye and a bit on nothing but the commercial horizon can be very, very alarming, especially now at the moment.
Yeah, we've obviously got a pretty public case in the US on the Boeing Max, 737, right? That was both a judicial and a civil, range of inquiries that were taking place, and you had, we obviously know the organizations that were involved, and you're absolutely right. The history or the archive, if you like, of how that particular airframe was certified and then put into service had safety implications the whole way through. And it's one thing to have a safety management system, but exactly to your point, how were you achieving the accountabilities prior to putting that aircraft into service?
Exactly. And if, like an awful lot of organizations, and I don't know, I think more so now than ever before, they have a sort of a self-applauding dashboard, and they got results, and they're happy to show it and flaunt it. But at the end of the day, it's just about gimmicky KPIs, SPIs, cargo IQ results. It doesn't mean diddly squat in the real world. And the sad thing is, Matthew, a lot of employees are also aware of that, which then takes away or dilutes the credibility they have for management.
You're right. There is a there is a culture, I think, of what I just call, marking your own homework, right? And again, symptomatic of what we've gone through. There is a growing sort of self-assessment type culture that's moving into, at least on the security side, we can see it. Without that sort of independent validation piece that sort of gives value to the fact that you've achieved a certain rating, you're at a certain level of systems maturity, if you like. But the organizational way in which, again, I keep going back, you and I were part of something in the past where there wasn't a day where you you were just forced kind of training. You didn't really know, you didn't really connect with it because it was just based on KPIs that weren't measuring effectiveness or impact, right? And that I think good mature organizations, that's changing. That is part of that systems management culture that we talk about, and specifically with human factors, and just making sure you get the right things and the right levels of empowerment. And of course, when you look at an airline specifically, the structure of the AOC, as we mentioned, that's autocratic by nature. So immediately you have these hierarchies where the safety effect is diminished because of the nature of the hierarchy.
Yep.
Right, and
also the way politics and filtering comes in, because some of those levels, they don't want the senior management to know that they've let it down, or they got foot off the pedal or whatever, which is why there should be an almost independent verification exercise as part of a CEO or the C-suite team's accountability.
Absolutely, and that's something personally that I talk about, and as part of IATA and the organization I'm with, that's also something that we work on in terms of whether you call it validation or certification, verification, be that what it is, it's that you're able to achieve that level of organizational trust because you've had a third party, or you've had that independent sort of eyes on oversight piece come in and validate that.
But now I've got something to pitch to you now, okay? And I'm sorry about this, put you on a bit of a spot.
It's all right.
All right, but you look at ISAGO, you look at IOSA, you look at what you've just called that independent group. Most of it is bullshit, Matthew, and it's hot air. And what it's doing is it's tick boxing, okay? And people get to know what to do. And the amount of organizations that have the head of that organization saying, I expect to see zero findings, and if there's no, if there are findings, then some of you need to find a new job and all this. It puts an unnecessary, ridiculous pressure on people that if they were doing the job properly, they would expect to find findings and they would welcome them because it helps improve the situation. Now, the same people that come along and do the audits or the reviews or whatever you want to call them, they're also under pressure, because if they're too tough on a client, the client is going to put a complaint in or say they don't want to have them again on the next audit.
Yep.
So that it's a little bit like you've got to be a strong character to not be influenced by that, or you've got to be financially independent. But it that needs a lot of tweaking as well, I think, Matthew, because it isn't being done correctly, and there doesn't seem to be a method of letting everybody in the industry know what's going wrong as a result of all of those audits, so that there's almost like a monthly update or a barometer of, the out of X amount of audits or reviews, without making it obvious who the companies were. The findings are this. We recommend that you do this, and if you don't follow this recommendation and you fall foul of the same issue, well, then obviously any repercussions will be magnified because you didn't take notice of the advice that was given to you.
Yeah, look, without sort of getting into the sort of corporate spiel, if you like, around what IATA is currently doing, I think it's accurate and fair to say that there is a reform agenda underway to go from the classical model that we have experienced to move towards what they're calling risk-based IOSA. IOSA is voluntary in nature. It is a registry. It is about validating management techniques, processes, as opposed to achieving some of that safety outcome. And absolutely, it's open to being gamed, right? It's and that fear culture of, or that intimidation culture of, we want zero this, zero that. you're spot on. I mean, that doesn't. How do you learn from how do you learn from that if you think you're zero, your zero risk is zero, right? So your safety risk is zero.
Yeah. No, I remember having a discussion with Nick about the IOSA issue, and it's such a shame because I mean, don't get me wrong, but I've even experienced places where the forwarders were told not to deliver between certain times so that the warehouse and the racking systems and everything were a lot cleaner, and it just makes everybody think to themselves, oh my God, and how a set of management can then come down to their employees and say, we want to encourage a just culture. It just has no value whatsoever. It's so wrong in so many ways. Now, let me ask you something. The 4 Fs, okay? The 4 Fs, favor, familiarity, flexibility, and fear. Now, what I tend to do, right, is if I go somewhere, I work out which one of them is the more prevalent. So is it 1, 2, 3, 4? Is it 1, 3, 4, 2? Is it 1, 4? Just to see which ones it is. And then you can see the types of risks and the types of shortfalls or non-compliances that occur in those particular areas. Now, the world, the way it is, Matthew, okay, and you imagine someone who's struggling to keep a family going, and they're either threatened or they're manipulated or they're bribed or whatever. It can make a huge difference, not just to them, but to their family and the next family. Now, that's one problem. Or they could be kidnapped, threatened, or you take the kids or whatever. And that's another issue that everybody has to be aware of. But if you had robust enough processes that even if I took you and whatever the demands were, you could turn to me and say, well, you can do what you want to me. But even if I do what you want, the likelihood of it getting through or getting passed is basically zero because of the robust process. That's where I think there's so many things go wrong. And if you look at some of the screening capabilities in some of these countries, and even taking visitors into the premises. Now, if everybody knows Matthew Vaughan, if I walk in behind you, Matthew Vaughan, and there's a security, hello, Matt, how are you? Oh, Chris, yeah, okay, where you go? They don't even open the case or the bag or anything.
Yeah.
Now that sort of thing happens on a regular basis. People who say they've lost their pass, well, they might have left the job a week or 3 weeks earlier. All those sort of things where it comes down then to, doing someone a favor because you think you're going to benefit yourself better, being over familiar with people, being too flexible with the process, and then most of all is fear. If I challenge my boss, he might give me a hard time. If I don't challenge him, all this sort of stuff. The clarity of what's expected, again, that needs to be brought across in training, Matthew, and it's missing in so many places. And I would then have them on. Well, I do. I put them on my own red list.
You mean the individuals or the organization?
When you go across the 1 to 4, you can work out whether it's an individuals because they want to gain something from it.
Yeah.
Or you can work out whether it's a culture because there's such a fear element in there, and then whether there's manipulation by authorities or people in higher ranking positions, who do things. It's it's very difficult.
So I think to pick up on one of the points, the crossover of an unbalanced personal life and how that then comes into your work life, and the exploit that you spoke about in terms of potentially something going on over here, and it manifests in sort of the organization that you're with. I would say the insider threat sort of overlay, if you like, and the structure that's attached to that. And when we get to our wrap up of these series, that's a really important part. There's probably no more important period of time than right now to ensure that you get those measures right. Yeah. And it's not as simple as just oversight and look, I've trained 100 people on how to ensure you don't double pass somebody through the gate check, right? So and there are certain parts of the world where community-based security which is what you're referring to before, is seemingly more effective than biometric control, entry control, right?
Yeah.
And to take that even further, there are certain parts of the world where families are involved, extended families are involved, and they're putting pressure on the son or the daughter that's successfully working in a foreign land, and they're in a lot of ways what you and I would call extortioning certain benefits out of, and that in my experience is that can be quite prevalent in certain parts of the world, and therefore represent a compromise to organizational safety and security. So
and sorry, Matthew, to interrupt you. And what I'm saying there is, if it's known, there are certain things that you can do to prevent it. So things like if I'm always working on night shifts, that opens me up to something going wrong on a night shift.
Yep.
If I can be rotated and there's a swing shift, or there's according to whatever, and I don't know what the shifts are going to be, it's much harder for people to plan and to abuse and to threaten. So there's lots of ways of keeping things active to help people who work for your organization.
Yeah, you're spot on. It's almost identical to the I grew up in a policing culture where you had partners, right? And of course, as the police organization I worked for had a range of royal commissions, one of those key outcomes where you've got to break down this culture of this partnership thing, because it leads to the deterioration of sort of ethical standards and things like that. It's the same thing in the cockpit environment of within aviation, right? You don't have you have a hierarchy, but those two pilots, they may have flown before together, but they certainly don't know each other, and they at least in most organizations, they're not crew scheduling purposely to get them together, right? And that has both, from a CRM crew resource management point of view, that has both really good safety and security benefits.
Yeah.
Which, based on statistics, in terms of where industry safety is today, flight safety, really effective. Like, I don't know how much more flight safe you can get.
Yeah, but again, also cultures come into it as well, because people are reluctant to challenge a captain as a first officer, because of all the things I've said, and that has and could still lead to unnecessary accidents.
You're spot on, and it has in the past. Again, it lends itself to sort of cultural influence as well, right? The degree that is culturally accepted. I think I mentioned before, I work within a committee in Washington, and it's a 4 or 5 year type committee. It has congressional sort of leverage, or at least oversight within that committee. And the first 30 minutes of that meeting is discussing about the merits of your Fifth Amendment rights.
Yeah.
And so as a foreigner dialing into that, I'm kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, it's great, but I don't really know exactly what you're talking about. But that is profoundly important to the Americans that are a part of that, in their right to be able to talk to Congress, to talk to, political officials, if you like, without needing to clear it through a governing committee.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Fifth Amendment in terms of, and how does that culture then parlay into safety and security, or organizational safety and security? It all roads lead back to that just culture and being able to talk without incrimination or punitive backlash.
Yeah, no, that's so important. And but it's not everywhere, Matthew. There's a huge amount of gaps, and it needs advocates of change, or it needs role models. It needs people who can really push that across. Because what I found, anyhow, is once you get them hooked, it's like fishing with a good bait. If the bait's right and they take a bite, then they'll always buy it again because they see the benefits of it, especially for themselves and the good of the business.
Yeah, it's to me, I think we're probably going down the path of the whole, empowering the whistleblower type model.
Yeah.
There are obviously merits between the anonymous nature of that capability, of that organizational capability versus someone that's really clear and wants to break from cover and call it out, right? And I've seen that in the sort of the fraud kind of world where it's a lot easier because you've got numbers to prove it. It's quite it's quite objective and impartial that way. But when you start getting into this, especially when you've got cultural variances, that can and that difficulty alone erodes away at the safety and security posture of organizations. Yeah.
Well, as we've come to the end of episode 4, it's a good job you're as young as you are because you've got plenty to do still, Matthew.
Okay. Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Look forward to seeing you in episode 5.